My name is Renee again, and today I have with me my little sister, Melissa.
Hi.
Melissa is a pre-K teacher in New York City, and she also was our little naturalist camp counselor a couple years back. So she is also involved in the Refuge. You may recognize Melissa's work from a lot of my Enchanted Forest acts. And today we have something special in store. Kim is behind the camera today.
Hi, everybody.
And Kim will actually be joining us after we sing a little song for you guys. So we hope you enjoy this. All right. A tall oak tree grew a round, brown nut at the end of one of its branches. That seed, an acorn, was blown by the wind, and it tumbled to the earth, and it rolled along the ground until it bumped into a big gray rock. And the acorn fell from a tall oak tree. It rolled along the ground. It came to rest on the side of a stone that was big and gray and round.
Excuse me, little pebble.
I'm not a pebble.
Well, you look like a pebble.
I'm an acorn.
Well, you look like a pebble. You look like a pebble, and so you're a pebble to me.
Well, that acorn was insulted and quite discouraged because deep in its heart it felt a stirring and a burning, a yearning to grow. Please let me explain with this simple refrain. I'm a nut, I'm a nut, I'm a nut, that's me. I fell down from a big oak tree. I may be small, but someday I'll be tall. I'm gonna grow into a big oak tree. Wait and see.
You look like a pebble to me.
Time passed. The acorn nestled itself down into the earth, and sure enough, before long, a sprout came out and dug into the ground. Roots spread all around, and a little leaf poked its head out of the earth, and it reached up towards the sky. It went higher and higher, till it was an oak tree looking down at that stone, who looked up at the enormous oak that was now growing beside it and said,
Things aren't always what they seem to be. You don't look like a pebble. You look like a tree.
and lots of little acorns grew from its branches, and they fell to the ground before long. And each of them sang this melody, because they all knew this song. I'm a nut, I'm a nut, I'm a nut, that's me. I fell down from a big oak tree. I may be small, but someday I'll be tall. I'm gonna grow into a big oak tree. Wait and see. So if you're ever worried about being small, forget about your troubles, 'cause someday you'll be tall. Just think about the acorn that fell from the tree, and sing this little melody along with me. I'm a nut, I'm a nut, I'm a nut, that's me. I fell down from a big oak tree. I may be small, but someday I'll be tall. I'm gonna grow into a big oak tree. Wait and see. It must be nice being a tree. So we hope you guys all enjoyed that song. It is by a wonderful nature storyteller. Her name is Heather Forrest. It's called the Acorn Song, and she has a bunch of other really wonderful songs, so definitely check her out. But now, Melissa's gonna leave us, so bye, Melissa!
Hi, Melissa.
And Kim is gonna come join us because we have a very special topic to talk to you about today. We're cozying up by the fire today inside. It's
Hi,
a little
everybody.
chilly. Say hi, Kim!
So today, we want to talk to you a little bit about what animals do in winter. And that's why we're sitting here next to our fire all warm and cozy inside, because this is what a lot of people do in winter. But animals actually actually do it 3 different ways. Animals either migrate, hibernate, or adapt, and sometimes they do both of these things. So today, Renee and I want to talk to you about what each of those things mean, and then also talk about a few different kinds of native animals that do those things.
Exactly. So a lot of animals, some of these things are kind of innate within them. So they do these things naturally. And what triggers them typically to do these things is a shorter photo period, so shorter days and less daylight, as well as a change in temperature. So as the cooler weather comes in, these guys will then have to start planning for the winter or start making their migration so that they're in an area that may be a bit warmer for them. So Kim right now I think is going to talk to you about
Migration. So migration is basically a seasonal movement of animals from one region of the world to another. So I think when a lot of people think about migration, we think of birds flying south for the winter and then coming back in the springtime to breed or mate up here. But actually, there are some birds that spend their winters here and then move north to their breeding grounds. So today I want to just talk about a few different species that are now coming back. So one of the first birds that comes back in the spring, and we've been seeing them for about maybe 6 weeks here, is the red-winged blackbird. So they're a real harbinger of spring. They spend their winters in the southern United States, and they're one of the first birds to come back. And then just recently, within about the past 2 weeks or so, we've started seeing osprey coming back to the refuge, and you can usually see them flying over the old ice pond, and there's a nest generally at Fairy Dell. But one bird that is very unique, that's actually coming back to these parts right now, is the woodcock. Now these birds are really, really interesting little creatures. And this is a taxidermy one that we have, but you can see they really don't look like your typical bird. So these guys actually fly, when they migrate, they fly only at night. And they fly distances of about maybe, I think it's like 50 to 100 feet, and then they stop for a break. So they fly at really low altitudes. And they come back and they mate here, right at the refuge, some of them, right around March or April. But they're really interesting birds, and owls. So snowy owls actually come and they migrate south from the Arctic tundra in the fall and spend their winter here. You can usually walk along Moon Road, and if you have a keen eye, you can see them sometimes right in the dunes. You can see them at Orient State Park sometimes, and they'll spend their winters here on the beach hunting for different rodents, and then right around now they'll do their northward migration to the Arctic tundra where they'll have their nests. And that's why you can see their plumage is really, really white, because they have to blend right in with that sort of environment. And Renee's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so many animals have to follow different cues, environmental cues that tell them how to get there. Because you might wonder, how does an animal know how to get to such a distance so far away, especially when they're making their first trip? And this is actually really amazing because it's just innate within them to travel these distances, but they rely on cues like celestial cues, which means cues from the stars. You may have heard of following the North Star, right? So they'll use celestial cues. So the woodcock, probably as a nocturnal flyer, it will rely something a bit on that, but also they rely sometimes on magnetic fields, which is really incredible. And there's different ways that scientists can study these things. So they rely on a whole bunch of things to show them. Some of them use landmarks to tell them how to get a certain way. So it's really amazing, and some of them do it within multiple generations. I think, you have an example of an animal that does that, right?
So actually, not only birds migrate. One animal or insect that we want to talk about today is the monarch butterfly. So these guys are incredible, and these are just some pinned ones that I'll show you. So these guys actually migrate through multiple generations, and you can see them congregating on the beaches here before they start their southward journey, generally in September and October. You can see lots of people taking photographs of them clustering on the scrubby vegetation over on Dune Road. And actually, what we're seeing there, that's called the super generation. So that specific generation of monarch butterfly lives much longer than their parents or even their grandparents did. And those butterflies will fly an incredible 3,000 miles to South America. Well, they'll spend the winter in Mexico, and then they have they procreate there, and their babies will begin the northward migration. And then they'll stop somewhere in the USA and have another generation of babies who will fly a little bit further north. And they'll stop and have another generation of babies who will fly and make it back to where their great-great-great-grandparents came from. So their whole migration follows about 4 or 5 different generations of butterflies, which is just incredible.
Yeah, so that's also important why we maintain areas that we call stopover areas or stopover habitats. A lot of these times when they go down to Mexico, they have very specific trees that they use, but along their flight path, they're looking for plants that are used for not only food, but also to lay their eggs on and to form a new chrysalis. So they need areas, specifically areas that use milkweed, right? Because milkweed is one of Monarch's favorite foods. And we talked a little bit about Tuesday, how box turtles are red colors for a warning signal. Milkweed is an important plant to the monarch butterflies, these beautiful red butterflies, because when they consume milkweed, the caterpillars, they actually become toxic to other animals. So milkweed is an important plant for them. It helps not only to nourish them, but also to protect them. So milkweed's a good plant to plant in your homes, in your yards, to give them a stopover area as they make their really long migration.
Very cool. In the summertime, if you're curious about milkweed, you can come to our native butterfly garden, our native pollinator garden here, and you can see some of that right in there. And we do get a lot of monarch butterflies.
Yeah,
so,
we do.
But we also want to talk about one other type of animal that migrates, and we are all big fans of these little critters. So actually, bats. New York State has 9 different species of bats, and there are 2 types of bats, basically. So this is a taxidermied example of a little brown bat, which is a cave bat. So these guys, I'll show him a little bit closer to you, but they are very cute. He doesn't really look as cute as they are in real life. But so these guys are what they call cave bats. And when they migrate, it might just be a short distance. Often little brown bats that are on Long Island will fly just a few hundred miles, maybe to upstate New York. Well, they'll find a cave or a hibernation site called a hibernacula. And actually, they'll congregate in huge numbers. So there's one site that's upstate New York in an abandoned mine where they had a record of 200,000 little brown bats hibernating at one time. So these guys actually do migration and hibernation, and you'll see that with a lot of animals. They don't just have one method of survival for the winter, they combine multiple different methods.
Yeah. So there are some bats actually, like the red bat, the eastern red bat. That's another bat that's common to our area, that some of them actually do not migrate. So some of them just hibernate here. So hibernation is another category of things that animals do to make it through the cold winter time. So there are actually not very many true hibernators. Kim, do you know the only true hibernator in New York?
We actually have one here at the Refuge, Quincy the Quogue groundhog.
Yeah, so groundhogs are really our only true hibernators. So what are the others doing? The others are mostly going through a state that we call torpor. So torpor is a sleeping period, a period of inactivity, where they're sleeping for periods of time, they're lowering their heart rate and they're lowering their body temperature. So this may just be for short times, short while at a time. So it could be just for a couple hours in the harshest of weather, or it could be for a day or 2, and then they wake up when the weather is just a bit warmer. So maybe even just waking up during the daytime and going through a state of torpor at night. In reptiles, we call this period actually brumation. So brumation is how we refer to this period in reptiles. And like Kim was saying, a hibernacula is what they use. Some reptiles, like garter snakes, will use hibernaculas, and they will go into a hibernacula in the thousands. So they'll kind of cuddle and snuggle. Oh, can you picture all those snakes snuggling together? So those animals, cold-blooded animals, will kind of stick together, and that will keep the area a bit warmer for them. That will help them to make it through the winter time. So a lot of animals to adapt. So hibernation is a very difficult thing to do. They have to make it these extremely long periods, sometimes months, without any food or water. Some animals will store food, like moles and chipmunks and mice, and they will store food underground in things called caches or larders. So they'll create little tunnels, and they'll sometimes still be active within their tunnels. So they'll be active in the ground, and they'll store food there so they can live off of those food stores. Animals like voles, who are insectivores, they can still readily find food like insects underneath the ground. So that's helpful to them. But they'll live below the freezing temperature. So they'll live enough underground that it's nice and warm down there, or a bit warmer than the frost line. So some animals that hibernate will actually pack on, like the groundhog. They spend their whole lives, their whole summers, packing on lots of food so that way they can make it through the winter time. So groundhogs will put on lots and lots of weight to make it sure that they can last through the winter time. And this is why, especially with animals like bats, like groundhogs, we don't disturb them during their hibernation, because if we wake them or rouse them from their hibernation, they use that energy, that stored energy, and sometimes then cannot make it through the winter. So I think you have some really amazing facts about groundhogs in hibernation, right?
I do. So groundhogs are incredible. And we actually, the reason why our groundhog Quincy couldn't hibernate this year is because he was really too small. He just didn't have enough fat on his body to make it through a hibernation this winter. But hopefully, in winters to come, he will be able to hibernate. But groundhogs actually, like Renee was saying, they make their den below the frost line. So while they're down there, the temperature will not go below freezing. But groundhogs, something that's amazing is when they're hibernating, all the processes of their body just slow down. So a groundhog's heart normally beats about 80 to 100 times a minute, but while they're hibernating, their heart will only beat about 4 or 5 times a minute. And also, their body temperature will drop drastically. So their body temperature will rest at as low as about 39 or 40 degrees. And so a groundhog can stay like that for months. A lot of the time they'll go into hibernation around October or November, and they won't emerge until around now, March or April. And when they do emerge, they'll actually be really, really skinny. So they'll lose about 30 to 40% of their body weight. And I think, like Renee was saying, that's why whenever you see a groundhog in the wild, or you're in the car with your parents, they're always eating. You always see them on the side of the road in a field just chewing away. And whenever we go to see our groundhog Quincy, he just needs food immediately. He doesn't care about us.
So another category is adaptation. So you see that they've kind of adapted and learned different ways to make it through the winter time, even with a hibernation. But adaptation is really incredible, because these are the animals that are still active, that we see right now, active during the winter time. So I have a couple examples of this. So one of the animals that we may see, we have a pelt over here. I don't know if you guys can see it a bit over there. This is a white-tailed deer, an animal that is very abundant here on Long Island, and really all over the United States. So this white-tailed deer, their coat will actually change during the wintertime. So sometimes it gets a bit darker in color, and that helps to absorb more sunlight. So that's really good for them for keeping warm. But also, they have a really thick undercoat and lots of hollow hairs. So their hollow hairs will trap a lot of the air within, close to their body, and their body temperature will warm that up. So it creates this nice little buffer of warm air around them. So animals with thick fur coats are good with using them during the winter time, which is why some people will wear either faux fur or fur during the winter time to kind of insulate them. You may have noticed that when we're cold, what do we get all over our body? We get goosebumps, right? And there is a reason for that. So nowadays, goosebumps are not all that helpful to us, but goosebumps what they do is they actually make our hair stand up. And that is kind of what the deer are doing. So our ancestors that were a little bit more hairy than us, that was helpful, because just like the deer, that hair standing up would create a little pocket between the hairs and the skin and create a nice space for the air to warm beneath them. A lot of people wonder then, well, why do we get goosebumps when we're scared or excited or nervous? That's also a response, because who's ever seen a nervous dog or a nervous cat? They puff up, they look bigger, they look nervous, they look scared, right? They look big and bold. part of the reason too. Their hair will stick up with the goosebumps, make them look a little bit bigger. Birds do a very similar thing, right? So here's an example of a pintail duck. This is a duck that we see on our pond. It migrates. Let's see, bring it a little bit closer. This animal will migrate here. Actually, during the wintertime, we see them on our ponds. This is a male. He has this long pintail. The females do look a little bit different in this species. But ducks, kind of like the undercoat of a deer, have an undercoat of feathers. It's called thick, downy feathers. We talked a little bit about this with Hooter. These are down feathers right here. These really fluffy, fuzzy feathers right here. You might have had a down comforter, a down jacket. These are good for insulation. And a lot of the time you can see when you're by our cages, during this time of year, our birds look big and fluffy. Same thing, they're lifting up their feathers, they're creating pockets of air within them, warming those pockets with their body temperature and staying nice and warm. But what's pretty amazing is our ducks, our geese, like these guys, the Canada geese, they're coming here and they're sometimes on our frozen ponds, standing in our icy, slushy water, standing on our frozen ponds. How do these little feet do that, right? How do these web feet withstand such cold temperatures? Well, it's actually really amazing. They have something called countercurrent exchange, countercurrent heat exchange. And what happens is the arterial blood, or the blood moving from the heart down through their legs, that artery runs really close to the vein of the cold blood running up from their feet hitting the ice. So they're so close, those arteries and those veins, that they actually, the warm blood coming from the heart will warm the cool air, the cool blood coming up from their feet. So it warms this before it reaches their heart, and that helps them to not get frostbite. So these guys can withstand freezing cold temperatures on their feet and be all right with that. Yeah, isn't that amazing? And then the other thing that ducks and geese do, we find them swimming in this freezing cold water, which is incredible. And even the small songbirds, they can withstand the rain and things during the winter. There's nothing worse than being cold and wet, right?
Oh no.
So these guys have, at the base of their body, where the start of their tail is, or the base of their tail, they have a gland called a preen gland, or a uropygial gland. And what that does is it holds oils that the ducks and the other birds use their beaks. You might have seen them do this, and they ruffle their feathers and they move their beak over their back. They gather up oil from their preen gland, and then they brush it through their feathers. And this waterproofs their feathers. So their feathers, when they go into the water will just bead right off of their feathers. You might have seen that happen before. It's really amazing. They stay so dry while swimming in the water. It's incredible, these animals, right? So they're waterproofed, so that helps them to stay very warm as well. So reptiles going through a brumation. So animals like our box turtle that you saw will live in the leaf litter beneath the frost line. Animals like this are still living in the water. Our snapping turtle, right? We talked a little bit about this guy the other day. Snapping turtles will go down into the banks, into the mud, into the muck, and sometimes these guys live in what we call anaerobic conditions, or conditions without oxygen. So these guys can survive very long periods in very low or no oxygen states, which is incredible. So they survive because they're able to survive without oxygen. When this happens, you might have noticed if you go for a long run, your body might not be getting the oxygen it needs pumped around to your muscles if you're running a lot. And what happens? You get a cramp, right? That's from a buildup of lactic acid. That's what happens to these guys when they're still awake in no oxygen temperatures. They get built up of lactic acid. So on a warm day, these guys will rouse and they'll come out to bask. And basking is really important because that is what helps to break down the lactic acid. Lactic acid, that's like a little bit of a tongue twister.
It is.
Gets stored in their shell. So when they bask, it releases that and gets rid of it so they can survive those long periods. Another thing that these, do you have something else?
And when you come to the refuge, if it's a nice sunny day, we have logs that are out on the pond, and they're specifically there for the turtles to crawl out of the water and to bask in the sun. And if it's a nice day, you can generally see like 10 to 20 turtles all piling on top of one another to get onto those logs.
Exactly, and many of the turtles you'll see are like this guy, or girl, gal, right? This is Teeny. If you look at Teeny up close, Teeny is a painted turtle. So these guys are common turtles to our area. Painted turtles, they like to bask, just like Kim was saying. And Teeny actually lives with us full time because she was illegally raised as a pet. She was bought in 2007 when she was about the size of a quarter. And she was raised in captivity. So she lacks the ability to care for herself, to find food and shelter. She wouldn't really know what to do during the winter time on her own. So she has to now actually stay in captivity. So Teeny is a painted turtle, and painted turtles are really incredible with what they do during the winter. They sit at the bottom without oxygen, or very low oxygen areas, and they actually are butt breathers. I thought all you kids might get a kick out of it. They breathe through an area in their butt. Is that it? You breathe out of your butt. So she actually, what she does is, our lungs consist of lots of blood vessels, and that's really important for holding a lot of oxygen. So does their butt. Their butt has lots and lots of blood vessels. So that's a place where they can store a lot of oxygen in low oxygen conditions. So it's a great way for these guys to survive the winter in areas deep under the ice that do not have a lot of oxygen in them. So these guys are so amazingly adapted. Say hi, Teeny. Hi, Teeny. She'll be happy to go back for a swim. And Kim, I think you have an animal. A lot of people confuse reptiles and amphibians because they're very similar and they're cold-blooded animals, but amphibians do some similar things as reptiles, right, during the winter?
Some pretty amazing things. And there's actually one amphibian in particular that we really want to talk to you guys about. And they're a really small little frog called the wood frog. And you can find them here in the Refuge. They live in forests on Long Island. And they're really pretty small. They're brown, kind of unassuming, only about 2 to 3 inches long. But what they do in the winter is absolutely incredible. So wood frogs actually, their bodies produce a kind of natural antifreeze. It's made of glucose, a type of glucose, but what it does is it actually prevents their organs from freezing, even in sub-zero temperatures. But throughout the winter, they'll bury themselves in leaf litter, and their bodies will actually shut down. So if you were to look at them, you would think it was a frozen frog. And people sometimes call them frogsicles, frozen frogs. And what happens is their heart will stop beating. They will not have any brain activity. There won't be any organ function. They won't be breathing. But during this time, they'll still be living and actually absorbing oxygen through their skin. And when the spring comes around and they start to warm up, they kind of thaw out. And within about 20 to 30 minutes, their heart will start beating, they'll start to have brain activity, and they'll be up and hopping around in no time. So they actually do kind of freeze throughout the winter, just without any harm to their bodies. So wood frogs are pretty incredible.
Yeah, so animals do really amazing things during the winter time. So we have a little bit of trivia this time to ask you some questions that you may have learned during this, and then we will, I think, open up to just a couple questions, because this kind of topic encompasses so many different things. All right, so I'll do my question first. Kim? Yes. Yes. All right, I don't know if you guys can read that. I should probably bring it close. Which of these terms does not belong?
Yeah, it just looks white.
There we go. A, torpor, B, brumation, or C, hibernation, or D, migration. Which of these terms does not belong? It's backwards, isn't it? Oh well. Which one? Any guesses?
Not yet.
guesses.
All right. Which of these terms does not belong? Torpor, brumation,
Oh, someone said
hibernation,
D.
migration. Correct. Yay! Torpor, brumation, and hibernation are all kind of sleeping states that these animals experience, right?
Okay, are you ready for question number 2? I don't think you have to hold it close.
It's backwards.
Okay, oh no, it's backwards. Okay, so we have which animal below migrates for the winter? A, osprey, B, great horned owl, C, squirrels, or D, garter snakes? Can you read it again?
Yeah.
Which animal below migrates for the winter? Osprey, great horned owl, squirrels, or garter snakes?
Someone said A. Osprey.
Yes!
The osprey.
Yay!
Very good. So great horned owls, like we discussed, they adapt. They get furry feet just like the snowy owls. You can see they get thick feathers called downy feathers. Squirrels will store their food in larders and in caches. And garter snakes will go into a hibernacula. So these animals hibernate, the other animals hibernate and adapt. Which of these animals hibernate? Gray squirrels, bald eagles, groundhogs, or white-tailed deer? Which of these animals hibernates? Gray squirrels, bald eagles, groundhogs, or white-tailed deer?
Leslie says C.
The groundhog!
Yay!
Good job! Groundhogs will hibernate, right? And their body temperature goes really low and their heartbeat almost stops.
Crazy.
Incredible.
Okay. Which animals experience brumation?
A tricky word, right? Brumation.
Brumation. Renee talked about this for a little bit.
Yeah. Examples of animals that brumate are animals like our snapping turtle, our painted turtle. What kind of animals are these? What kind of animal is a turtle? This is a tricky one, I know.
Someone said frogs.
Oh, that's close. I don't know if they consider it brumation in frogs. It's mostly in reptiles. So again, frogs are amphibians, very closely linked to reptiles. But cold-blooded animals go through brumation. Primarily reptiles, they consider it brumation. All right.
Last question.
True or false? An osprey can travel hundreds of thousands of migratory miles in their lifetime. Hundreds of thousands. Can an osprey travel that far? Let's see. What do you think? True or false? Can an osprey travel hundreds of thousands of migratory miles?
Me says true.
True. Oh
Yes.
my gosh, we are so
It
smart.
is true.
There,
So
Amy?
some osprey actually migrate just about 3,000 miles each way. So a lot of osprey will spend the winter in South America, really the deepest parts of the southern U.S., and then that's about a 3,000-mile trip, and then they come back in the spring, and they can do that for years and years. And I think actually the one osprey was logged at traveling about 160,000 miles in their lifetime. And they're capable of flights that are 24 hours straight, just flying, which is incredible.
That is amazing. That's
So-
really amazing.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, good
Very
job.
good.
Awesome. Thanks for listening. So, I think we'll open it up to a couple questions,
Yes.
right? So, do we have any questions? Hibernation, migration, adaptation questions?
Can ask us about any birds that you might be seeing right now or anything like that?
There is a little bit of a delay on our questions, so we're gonna give you guys some time to type them out.
Yes.
I don't think there were any up here.
One migration that people get very excited about for the spring is the warbler migration, but they're not coming back quite yet. Usually about May is when the warblers really start to.
And warblers are really small songbirds. And a lot of them are yellow in color. Not all, but most, right?
Yeah.
Barmanda said, how do bats wake up? And that's from Eli.
Oh, how do bats wake up? So bats, it naturally rouses them awake. So as the temperature changes, they will wake up. But bats can also wake up if there's a disturbance. So that's why it's important to stay out of areas like caves where cave bats are hibernating. So they'll wake up from a noise or a disturbance. Otherwise, they'll just wake up naturally as it gets a little bit warmer and their internal body temperature changes, because bats are mammals. So their temperature kind of stays not. I don't think it drops too low. It stays kind of moderate, and then they'll warm up.
We have 2 questions about turtles. One is from Jessica. She says, are the turtles living in the pond right now under the water? And then Amy asked, are the snapping turtles hibernating?
Yes. So our turtles will come out on warm or sunny days.
Yeah.
So even if our pond freezes most of the way over, we do have a little heater that keeps a small amount of our pond open. But even if the water freezes on a warmer day, our turtles will rouse. So they're going through torpor, not quite hibernation. So they're just sleeping on the very cold days. They're waking up on the warmer days to eat or to bask.
That's all the
And
questions.
the snapping turtles are in our ponds right now as well, and they're doing the same thing as many of our other water turtles. And then our box turtles that are living on land are underneath the frost line, usually in the leaf litter or maybe some murky, muddy areas. But that's all our questions for today.
Thank you so much for joining us again, guys. And we'll be back on Tuesday with something really special that I think you'll like. It's an animal we talked about briefly today, and I think you'll be excited to meet him. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.